Welcome back to Labor Lines. My name is Vic Fusco. Our guest is Senator Tony Avella and attorney Edward Stone. And together they are trying to preserve the pension rights of 41,000 Bell-Tel retirees. And beyond that, many more retirees who are going to be subject to this new game that big corporations are playing, which they call pension stripping. And what that means is a big company like Verizon, or Bell-Tel as it was, sells off the pensions to an insurance company like Prudential. And when it does that, those pensions, those liabilities which had the protection of the Employee Retirement Income Security Law, a federal law, lose that protection and now fall under state law. And the state laws vary. They're different in every one of 50 states. And you could lose rights just by moving from one state to another. So this is a serious problem. Now, Senator Avella stated that he believes that Verizon and Prudential are going to come talk to him once he floats a bill. But I have concerns that they're going to look upon this as an adversarial proceeding and fear that litigation may be in the offing and may not be so cooperative. Ed, let's turn it over to you. If that happens, how does that affect these folks?
Well, the marketplace says it makes Prudential less valuable because they're going to have to disclose more. The irony is that makes them potentially riskier. At the end of the day, I don't think anybody knows how it's going to work. It's going to require more disclosures, more transparency. Some would say that's good. From my perspective, that might be good. Maybe they'll be required to disclose the separate account balances in these group annuity contracts. I would like that. That's good. What they don't want is somebody telling them what protections they have to offer. When they enter into a group annuity, they want to get paid a premium, and they want to be able to manage the assets the way they want to manage them. They want to make the payments, and they will make the payments, and they are subject to one regulator, their New Jersey state regulator. So whatever they want to do with their filings, that's between them and the New Jersey State Insurance Department. They don't want to be subject to uniform standards.
If they're operating in New York, and they may be much bigger in New York than New Jersey, they're not subject to the New York Insurance Department?
Prudential's primary regulator is New Jersey. It's the New Jersey Insurance Department. Prudential as a company has to be licensed in any state where it does business. Prudential is licensed in New York and does a substantial amount of business in New York and is subject to oversight by the Department of Financial Services of the state of New York. But their primary regulator is the state of New Jersey. So in an insolvency, it would be in New Jersey. In terms of product design and approval, it would be New Jersey. Certain products would have to be approved by New York and other states based on that particular product. They have to get permission to introduce a product in any given state. But the primary regulator is New Jersey.
That complicates things.
Sure.
Yeah.
Makes you more nervous, doesn't it?
It should make you more nervous because you're not going to have uniform treatment. And the issue you mentioned about bankruptcy is huge with estate planning issues, Medicaid, people trying to figure out how to manage finances to deal with retirement, perhaps an ailing spouse. The likelihood of bankruptcy is very real, very significant. So is the likelihood of getting sued and having a creditor challenge.
Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, but even if we were to get this legislation passed in New York State, if that retiree moves to another state, they lose that protection.
That's 100% correct. 100% correct.
So then it becomes Ed's job, and your job too, Tony, to reach out to other state legislators. Right. Isn't there a legislative conference that state legislators go to?
There is. I have not gone to it, but there is. And Ed and I have been talking about this, that if we can get the legislation passed in New York State is often the leader on a lot of issues, it would be a template for the rest of the states across the country, because there has to be some uniform standard.
Have you written any law review articles or popular press articles? I mean, this to me is a dry issue, which is really a hot issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I have one I can even give you. It's called The Risks of De-Risking. We like to refer to it now as pension stripping because it's de-risking for Verizon, but it's really pension stripping from the perspective of the retiree.
Yeah.
But yes, I wrote a short piece that's called The Risk of De-Risking, which I'm happy to share with you. That's just 5-page simple summary that I've shared with the Association of Bell-Tel Retirees and with Senator Avella's office to kind of lay out not only what happens in this particular context, but the laws under the various different states and what it means for selective annuities.
Have they reached out to any other retiree association saying, this happened to us, it can happen to you, join with us in lobbying state legislators in every state, because these folks are from every state, and let's get a Tony Avella in New Jersey, and one in Texas, and one in Florida, and one in Georgia, something like that, to introduce similar legislation.
I think that's ideally what we're looking to do. And New York is a very important state, and there's a lot of retirees in New York.
Wouldn't Florida be next?
Florida would be right up there, although annuities happen to be exempt in Florida. So now we're going to hear the noise of all the buses pulling out. But annuities are 100% exempt in Florida, so you don't have some of the same creditor concerns that you would have in New York. You don't have the bankruptcy trustee concerns that you would have in New York.
A lot of states are even worse than New York.
There are states that are far worse than New York. And one of the issues that struck Senator Avella right away was, you mean if I move from New York to Arizona, I go from $500,000 in coverage under New York's Guarantee Association to $100,000?
And you can't be a senator here anymore.
And the other thing that really struck me, and this is why I got involved in the first case, is that I don't believe that the voluntary guarantee associations that exist across the country are anywhere near prepared to handle an insolvency the size of a Prudential's. I'm not looking for Prudential to to file for insolvency tomorrow, but these associations are not ready to take on $1 trillion insolvency. They're just not.
Because no one ever thought that these big corporations or big insurance companies would ever fail, and now we know that has happened and is likely to happen in the future.
We get the legislation in New York, and then will you try to help other states do the same thing?
In fact, we have similar legislation that's slated to be introduced in Connecticut in the next session. Representative Gerald Fox, who is chairman of the Judiciary Committee, has already seen this, and he introduced it in the last session and is going to reintroduce it in the next session. We've also reached out to a couple other states through Association of Belltel Retirees and another organization called ProtectSeniors.org. Both those organizations provide enormous amount of resources and information to retirees, even non-members, about these issues. And so we've reached out to a number of other states, and we have a few more on the agenda, but we're hoping to get a prominent state like New York to pass something meaningful that we can then use as an example for other model for others.
The AFL-CIO has a retiree organization, and what about AARP? Do they have any interest in this?
I have met with representatives of AARP in Washington. There were some hearings held in Washington about this very issue. The Department of Labor is looking closely at it and trying to figure out what can be done before the transfers occur. In other words, to put in place certain protections for companies when they want to divest themselves of ERISA. And that's going to continue. There is a big issue there. On the AARP side, I know they're concerned about retirees having their pension obligations taken away from them, but I'm not sure exactly what their plans are moving.
What would be the role of the New York State Controller or the New York State Department of Labor in this type of thing? Would they get involved also in joining up with you?
The main responsibility falls for the Department of Financial Services. Obviously, the other agencies you mentioned are Prudential. But to go back to the question you just asked, Ed, once we get back to Albany and we actually have a discussion about this, and the fact that you're having it on your radio show, once more people realize that this is actually occurring, I think there's going to be a huge movement to get these practices, the federal protections, into law in New York State, and it'll move to other states. I'm convinced about that.
A lot of people who may be listening are presently working, and they're not thinking ahead this far. They're not thinking ahead, and time goes very quickly. What should workers do? What should retirees do in terms of waking up other legislators, the public, their friends in other states? What should they be doing?
Well, in terms of the actual legislation, until we get a number, it's pretty hard for people to track legislation in Albany. We start with, at the beginning of session, Bill number 1, and by the end of session, at the end of the year, we're up to Bill 7,000. I always urge people to call their own assembly member, their own senator, write a letter, call the governor, write the governor, and I always say, don't do an email, don't do a petition, do an individual letter to your elected official. Means so much, because if an elected official gets 10 or 20 letters on an issue, they know that 10 times as many people are interested in that. So an individual letter means a very lot. I would urge listeners to start thinking about getting involved in this issue, because whether you've got a pension now or you're 10 years down the road, if we let this happen, every major corporation is going to do this pension de-stripping because they get out of the risk. They put the risk on the worker, and at the end of the day, 5 years down the line, all of a sudden, you're retired, and you're not getting that monthly check anymore.
The other thing, just to follow up on Senator Vella's comments, there's nothing, the way this is done now, that would prevent Prudential from transferring their obligation to another insurance company.
The legal term for that is oy vey.
Oy vey.
It could go to the Joe and Barry Insurance Company.
Well, I mean, they are subject to New Jersey State Insurance Department regulation. They'd have to get the blessing of the New Jersey State Department of Insurance. But there is nothing that would stop them the way the law's written now.
With healthcare, with health benefits, kind of filtering out of a lot of the companies when it merging. And all of a sudden, that company doesn't want to insure your group anymore.
Right.
And being an employer and providing health care has been, I would say, a nightmare for many years, and it takes up a lot of your time and a lot of joint energy of a few people looking at it and finding that you've got to go to your employees and say, the copay's going up, or the deductible's going up, the price is going up, and it's really hard.
Oh, and how? And I can imagine a retiree then seeing their pension going to an annuity, which then could, as Ed said, go to another company and you just get lost.
Yeah.
You absolutely get lost. And the average retiree, to get through this bureaucracy, it just would be a nightmare for the average person.
Our guest is Senator Tony Avella from the 11th District, which is Bayside, the Bayside area, a beautiful area of New York City. I love visiting Bayside. I love going down Bell Boulevard. And Edward Stone, an attorney at law with offices in Connecticut and New York City, and he is, I won't say an expert, he's probably the only expert on this kind of issue involving pensions and ERISA and getting out of obligations and representing large groups when they're getting a screwing, as we in the legal profession say. I'd like to close with a legal term that you and I would understand, but I think you two have scared the hell out of us.
Well, our goal was really to educate. I think as Senator Avella said, and I'm very grateful to the senator for taking this issue on so early in the process, but people don't understand what's going on. And they will naturally be afraid if they don't understand. So if there's anything that we can do to dispel some of that fear and give them a voice, then I think at least we've accomplished something. And thank you very much for letting it be heard.
Thank you for having us on your show.
Good having you. Good meeting you both.
Thank you.